Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind Meets Body and Soul, the last episode of the month, which means we are welcoming a guest speaker on, our first guest of the year, one that I'm very excited about. But before we introduce her, I'm also here with my lovely co-host, Devon. How you doing?
Hi, Heather. I am doing well. It's really hard to believe that when this episode drops, it'll be the last week of January. Not trying to rush it, but always excited to have our guest speakers on for that last episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm struggling with the fact that it's 2024 already, so let alone the fact that this will be coming out at the end of January, but we don't have to talk about that. So, today's guest is a very good friend of mine. Her name is Alexandra Pool, and she is a therapist at the Therapy Group. Alex works with clients in person at the Therapy Group's Philadelphia and Westchester offices, as well as virtually for clients in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. Alex specializes in working with clients with eating disorders, body image, anxiety, and life transitions. When it comes to eating disorder therapy, her approach is rooted in the principles of health at every size, and she is committed to working with clients to cultivate an intuitive relationship with food and their body. In addition, Alex coaches family members, partners, roommates, and parents around the ins and outs of eating disorder recovery and how to set boundaries in supportive and appropriate ways with a loved one who is struggling. That's her official bio. But hi, Alex. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I know. I'm excited that you're here too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun.
So, first question, we'll just jump right in. Tell us about what made you want to become a therapist, what got you here. You could tell us a little bit about your background if you wish to.
Yeah. So it's funny. I think back to like my teenager and young adult self, and even telling that younger self that I'm a therapist today, I think I would feel very surprised and maybe even a little judgmental about it. Because when I was, in those years of my life, I definitely was approached by people in my life, specifically my mom, telling me, I should go to therapy, and I would try to go to therapy. And I just never really found anyone that I connected with. And I had such a judgmental idea about what therapy was. And I think more than anything, it was really something that felt like this is where you go because you have a problem, or even broader, we could say, is like, I am a problem, that I have to do something and change myself or change the way that I'm operating within the world. And it really wasn't until I went to undergrad and I started taking some psychology classes and really learning more about the human brain and just like the human experience, that I was able to kind of see my own experience in a very different way. And that really allowed me to say, okay, there's a different way to approach people when it comes to therapy. And I would say the biggest thing for me, especially when it comes to eating disorder therapy, is that I think it was my junior year in undergrad, I had a class where we had it was a eating disorder treatment and pathology class. And the professor was a therapist herself, and she brought in some of her clients to kind of share their experience and kind of what they did in therapy and just learning about their experience in therapy. And I also really liked the professor. She was very relatable and young. It just opened my eyes again to like what therapy could be. But I also just became so interested in working with clients with eating disorders and I'd say more broadly women in particular, because it just seemed such a powerful experience. And I really just overall wanted to become a therapist because I wanted to be someone that my younger self would feel more comfortable going to and opening up to, because therapy can feel so clinical and just not opening and inviting. And I really wanted to create an environment for my clients, and something that I really strive to do now is to be authentic and human with my clients more than anything. I think, Heather, you say this a lot, like human first, therapist second. And that's really something that I try to do in my own work with clients too.
I appreciate you sharing all of that. And it's funny, my experience was kind of similar. Like, I think the way that they even taught me in school about therapy, like you hear about like
Mm-hmm.
Freud and the couch, and like it's this whole like very clinical thing. And then I think we used to joke, I don't know if it was when we worked together, Alex, or if it was at a job previously, that like all my coworkers were like, we missed the class in grad school about like actually how to become a therapist.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
learn like the theory, right? And the modalities and like all of the history. But I'm also like in hearing you say that, I'm kind of actually glad that they didn't say like this is how it should be,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it allows us to all bring in our own approach and have that human interaction. Like as a human, I'm a different human from you, from Devon, from another person. So like it allows us to have more of that like authenticity in the work that we're doing. And I think that's something I'm also seeing, like this generation of therapists out in the
Mm-hmm.
world are like really embracing a little bit more. And we have social media and we share a little bit more about ourselves. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that like stood out to me, is that like you value the work that your clients are doing. And it's important for you to not only create a safe space for them, but like an authentic, comfortable space too. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really trying to be human with them, because I think, we know that the number one predictor of success in therapy is the therapeutic relationship itself. So focusing in on the relationship and just being human is so powerful. And it is something that, like you said, you don't really learn how to be a human in graduate school, but being able to say, okay, wait, I have a lot of skills in my own life experience that I can bring into the room, I think is so powerful.
I love that. And something that you said that's really stuck out to me, Alex, was about how you're aiming to show up in a way that your younger self would have felt really comfortable opening up to and sharing with a therapist at that time. And it really beautifully sums up what I think we do as adults, or we try to do as adults, in the roles that we take on, like teacher, therapist, healer, coach, parent, even, is that we aim to show up in a way that our younger selves really could have benefited from.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of that like really cute inner child healing moment where we are giving what our inner child or our younger self needed. We're giving that then to the world around us in an effort to make others also feel comfortable and loved and supported.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really powerful to be able to do that and to give back in some ways, and also, just be able to see too. I think it can be even healing for, I'll speak for myself, like healing for myself to be able to do that work for other people and be there for other people, and just be like, wow, I wish I had this, and I'm so thankful and appreciative that I get to do this work and hopefully be that person for my clients, and someone else, especially when it comes to teenagers and young adults. I think that part in your life, and that's where I tend to really work with a lot of clients within that age group, that really is where you kind of want to have that other person, and an adult that you feel like, okay, I can talk to safely, that's not necessarily a family member, or teacher. It's like someone else outside of that, I think, can just be so powerful.
I think too, like the thing that happens when we show up as a human and we show up authentically is that we show up in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot on this podcast about like present focused awareness and mindfulness and like being in this space. And then also they teach us in school. And Devon, I know you talk about this, about like meeting your client where they are. So like when we show up in this way, we're really with that person in that space and able to capture and speak to and support them in that moment that they're in. And I think that's such a powerful thing that friends, family members, roommates, all of the other people in our lives have a tendency to miss the mark on when they're offering support, is like, we're often not listening and responding to what you're saying. I'm like, okay, what am I going to say back to what you're saying? And I think that's another thing that like is really powerful that all three of us can do in that space when we're supporting someone.
Yeah, being able to hold that space for someone's emotions and really listen to them, and not, because obviously as anyone who is emotionally invested in your life and cares about you, you want to go in and fix it right away. And oftentimes when we go into that fix it mode, even though we think, okay, I'm helping this person, it really can leave the person feeling unheard, because you're just going into, okay, let's just go to the solution, when they might not be ready for that. And so as a therapist, I think, in the beginning, you do try to go right into fix it mode, because that's what it feels like your role is. But you learn over time, like, that's actually not where your skill lies and what your role is. And being able to really just be that person to listen and validate and walk through that experience with another person is really the job of a therapist.
We also obviously titled in this podcast is Mind, Body, and Soul. So talk to us about your work, the work that you're doing with your clients. How do you incorporate mind, body, soul connection? Are you doing any of that work? Like, what does all of this look like from the mental health therapist standpoint?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, and I'll talk in particular about my work with eating disorder and clients, just because that is where I do tend to see majority of my clients. Of course, as I said earlier, like, I work with clients through anxiety and life transitions, but eating disorders is definitely where the bulk of my work comes from. And so, of course, when it comes to disordered eating and our body image, it inevitably is linked to our bodies itself and our physical bodies. So the first thing that I really have to do as a therapist is to really assess where they are in the process when it comes to disordered eating or diets. And if a client is coming in with significant restriction or any other eating disorder behaviors, we have to acknowledge the reality that it's so hard for them to make any sort of peace with their minds and in their relationships and in their world if they don't take care of their body first. So that's really where I start with a lot of my clients, is figuring out, okay, where are you in taking care of your body? Because if the brain is anywhat malnourished or isn't necessarily getting the nutrients it needs and the intervals that it needs it, then talk therapy isn't really as effective, because it requires a higher cognitive function than the brain can really handle at this state. So I really have to think about, okay, how is someone taking care of their body? How are they treating their body? And what does their ultimate relationship with their body look like to begin any of my work? Because if, like I said, they're not necessarily getting the nutrients, then we have to really work on getting kind of those basic needs met. When we talk about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know that your physiological needs are on the bottom. And oftentimes when people are coming into therapy, they really want to look at those other parts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we have our safety and security needs, the social needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization. And if we don't have those bottom parts met, then we can't do any of that other work. So my ultimate goal is to say, okay, how can we get those physiological needs and create safety and security in their own body?
What you just shared, Alex, made me think of the unique position that you're in as a therapist, who is very mental based, but also working with clients who are working through those body image and the eating disorders, because it is there, the connection between the mind and the body is like, unmissable there.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
they go hand in hand. And so I love that, to hear you speak to how you really work with the body. And we've talked in previous episodes, kind of actually just touched on that, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and talking about those basic needs of safety, of nutrition, are really what we need to function first and foremost at the start of our day. So I love that that's where you are starting with your clients at the very basis, and then bringing in that spiritual component too. For me, just from hearing from you, it sounds like I think of the word spirit and I think of like our emotional well-being and just our ability to show up in our day-to-day feeling a sense of peace and joy and fulfillment. And so I love how you started out sharing what you did about what you do, talking specifically about the mind and the body and how they interact with one another. And then it just easily brings in that spiritual or that spirit component from there.
I think it's really important to, and I'm glad that you said this, like understand that connection. And I do think like we have to start, we live every day. People say like the longest relationship we ever have is with ourselves, and especially with our body. So if we're really struggling in that relationship, it's inevitably going to make like everything else harder, right? All of our other relationships, showing up at work, showing up at school, just like everyday life is so hard when we struggle to be in the literal body that we're in. So I do think like that's so important. But the clients, for them, I imagine that's so hard. That's
Oh,
probably the
absolutely.
work they're like, no. Like, let's skip that and let's get to
Yes.
the emotional stuff. Let's get to those like higher
Yeah.
pieces of that hierarchy. So, how do you navigate that space then of knowing that this is important work to do while also like it's probably challenging and or triggering and not
Yeah.
where your client may want to be?
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely the hardest part of this process is getting buy-in from clients. I think the position I'm in now, being in outpatient, most of the clients that come in are, for the most part, I would say 75-80%, they want to be there. They want to make change. When I was working in higher levels of care, that was a very different experience and not necessarily the case where like, okay, I'm coming in and I want to be here and I want to make change. I mean, of course, some people, but it's so hard to actually get that buy-in and to say, okay, I'm going to let go of this control that I am holding on to, or let go of this framework or these beliefs that I've been told over throughout my entire life, because we do live in a world, and especially now that it's January too, I think we're probably all seeing this everywhere, where diets and losing weight and being in smaller bodies is praised. And so, of course, that's not the only reason why people develop these eating patterns and behaviors, but we do know that that has a huge impact on the way that people see their bodies and the beliefs that they have around what their body actually needs. So a lot of it is, trying to just build that motivation and also bring awareness to what is the cost of this, because a lot of times people are so focused in on the physical aspect of it, of, okay, this is what, my body, I've been able to lose weight from this, and not necessarily taking into account the cost of how it's impacted your social life, your academics, your career, whatever it may be, and trying to bring more awareness to that to get more buy-in of, okay, there's this, basically the cost of this eating disorder is not worth the perceived benefit. And again, people, it's not just about the way their body looks. We know that eating disorders are very much a emotional, mental thing that people have to work through, yet it's often that body itself that kind of keeps people entrenched in the eating disorder much longer than they would want to kind of be in.
It makes me think of the therapyism that Heather always shares on this podcast, and that's of zooming out. Because what it sounds like to me is like it's so easy for us to have our eyes set on the one thing, or like to look in the mirror and see the one thing that's right in front of us, and to see that being the problem, and to see the solution being something like losing weight. And so when I think of Heather's therapyism of zooming out, it's looking at exactly what you just said, all of those pieces of the puzzle. Like, how is this affecting my relationships, not only with myself, but with others? How is this affecting the way that I show up in my job, in the world around me? And so that advice, thank you, Heather, to zoom out really allows for that, or gives kind of that permission to consider the bigger picture.
I love to zoom out. I say it all the time. I wish I had like, I'm going to have to get a jar. And like every time I say a therapyism, I'm going to put $1 in it and then go like treat myself to something, because I do think like there's so much to be said about zooming out and getting out of the weeds, or just kind of like looking at things from a different perspective. And I think that's a lot of what we do too. Is I'll say things sometimes to clients and they're like, oh my gosh, that literally never even crossed my mind, wasn't even a thought that I've had. And I do think it's really cool to help people be able to change that perspective, see things differently, and walk along with them while they're on that path to reframing all of that and doing that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too, you know, when it comes to the cognitive component of all of this, I think the changing your thought patterns and really being able to zoom out and see things differently is so challenging, especially when it comes to body image in particular. Being able to see your body in any sort of a different way than the way that you've been viewing it for so long is extremely challenging, because not because we don't want to see our body differently, but because the thoughts that we have about our body just strengthen the more times that we continue to think that way or follow that brain path. This is probably a therapyism that you might have said before, but neurons that fire together wire together. So it's just like ultimately you're strengthening that belief. So it's so much harder to change the way that you think about your body, the way that you think about food, when you've been telling yourself for however many years that carbs are bad, that my legs are fat, whatever it may be that you're telling yourself. It's so hard to let go of that because it becomes a habit. So it's almost a lot of times what I tell my clients too is that it is like learning a whole new language, that you have to now all of a sudden you've been speaking English and now all of a sudden you have to speak Spanish. And that takes a lot of time and energy and consistency to be able to learn.
And not only do you have to learn a new language, but you have to unlearn the old one
Yeah,
too, right?
yes,
So it's like
absolutely.
this process of like unlearning and relearning. And that's why like it does take a lot of time and consistency and energy and effort.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And really that compassion piece is what allows me to show up as who I am and be human. And also it allows me to really be open to my clients' experiences. So when it comes to eating disorders and particularly the lens in which I work, I do think one of the more powerful things that I learned in really early in working in higher levels of care is that the eating disorder itself served some sort of function, that it didn't just come out of nowhere, or it's just something that they, you know, developed and all of a sudden now you have to fix it. It's something that served a purpose, whether it was that it allowed them to feel in control, it felt safe, it kept them feeling more secure within themselves, whatever it was, the eating disorder serves a function, and being able to hold that space for the eating disorder and recognize, especially with when they come to me and it's like, okay, we have to start like letting go of some of that. This is where we want to start making changes. We have to also start saying, okay, we can honor the eating disorder for what it did and for the purpose that it served in my life for the time that it did. And we have to now recognize that it's no longer serving that function, that this isn't necessarily providing safety, that this is something that's no longer healthy and good for my life. And how can I learn to let that go and find other things and bring other pieces of control and security back into my life?
For me, that was definitely the biggest thing that I took away from that experience that we had working in that higher level of care, because I think that was an like crucial step that I didn't even understand
Mm-hmm.
like how important it was. So how could my clients understand that? But I think that's where the grief work comes in, and it, as wild as it might sound, gratitude for how that protected and served you at that time.
Absolutely.
And then I think that allows space for people to be a little bit more ready or a little bit more willing to also like let it go too. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
relationship from the past. We don't always have to have this like anger or hatred for something. We can appreciate it for what it was and what it did, and still know like I'm ready to move forward, or it's no longer serving me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I really love these conversations where we do bring in guest speakers like yourself, Alex, because it just gives a whole new perspective to something that I personally hadn't considered in the past, but it makes so much sense. This piece of looking at something like an eating disorder, which one might consider to be, a harmful, negative thing that they want to get rid of, it makes me think of shadow work and how we have these parts of ourselves, these more negative belief systems or habits that we have, and we tend to view them as this thing that's bad and we need to get rid of it. We need to,
Mm-hmm.
cut ties with it and let go of it. But what you just so helpfully suggested is that, like, they're serving a purpose at one point or another. And now when we enter into some type of healing space, container, therapy, whatever, we are at a point where we're like, you know what? This isn't serving me anymore. And so I love being able to see it as like an old friend. It's hard to consider it maybe
Mm-hmm.
as a friend, but it really is. Like it was at one point a friend to us, and now we're just reevaluating that relationship and deciding that we want to form a different relationship with that part
Mm-hmm.
of ourselves.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot of things on this podcast before that I know that you incorporate in your work, things like radical acceptance, gratitude, balance, body neutrality. So, can you speak to any of those, and if and how you incorporate those into the work that you're doing with your clients?
To really start off, you mentioned radical acceptance, and that's the one that stands out to me because I think that's a lot of this process and kind of what we've been talking about a little bit is when it comes to making any sort of change, there's always going to be a little bit of a grieving process and a lot of discomfort. And radical acceptance can allow us to accept that this change needs to happen, or I can accept that this is something I need to do, even though I don't necessarily like it and I feel uncomfortable. I can continue to move through it. And particularly when it comes to body image, a lot of times people's beliefs about their body and how they feel about their body is a huge barrier to taking care of themselves and giving their body the nourishment that it needs. So if you can radically accept that I can't, at this point in time, I can't, I'm not in a place where I can love my body and I still need to take care of it. I think that can be so powerful in moving the work forward because you don't need to love your body to take care of it. You need to take care of your body in order to live and to have these other things that you want in your life. And if you can bring some acceptance to that with, the goal potentially is to have a better relationship with your body and to think differently about your body in the future, but not necessarily saying that that has to happen in order to take those next steps.
Yeah, exactly that. I think that's why I love radical acceptance, is because it gives us an opportunity to think about something that it doesn't have to be so black and white. I think radical
Mm-hmm.
acceptance holds space for that gray, just in that, like, I don't have to like it and I can still do it. And it doesn't have to be my favorite thing, but I'm still going to try and I'm still going to move forward. And that's where the body neutrality comes in too, right? Of like, I don't have to go
Mm-hmm.
from hating my body or hating parts of my body to loving and being confident in it, but can we just hold more neutral space for
Mm-hmm.
that and just accepting that, like, I have a body and I live in this body, and that's my reality, whether I like it or not. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can be okay with the fact that this is it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first and foremost, and I didn't mention this earlier, but it came into my mind. Of course, it left, and now it's back. Is that my part of my work with clients is also working with a dietitian and making sure that they have that nutritional support so that they can focus in on the nutrition piece, but then also I can do more of that emotional piece with them, and it gives more space because otherwise our work can be kind of taken up by doing a lot of like the nutritional component when I also just don't have the education and proper skill to do that with them. So what I really try to do is encourage my clients to work with dietitians, and particularly clients work with dietitians who have eating disorder experience. I think is the most important thing, because there's all different types of dietitians out there, but you want to make sure that you have one who's rooted in taking care of eating disorders and really health at every size. I think that also is something that I really do try to bring into my work with clients, is the principles of health at every size and being able to, again, kind of going back to radical acceptance, accept your body as it is right now and focus more in on the health and taking care of your body and not necessarily focusing in on the size, and being able to also acknowledge the different privileges that exist in our world for different body sizes. I think that that's a huge piece that I focus in on. So I definitely encourage clients to look into health at every size and try to, do their own exploration there, because that can be really powerful in being able to learn about a different way of viewing our bodies, because it isn't, unfortunately, the way that a lot of our world views bodies and health. And also, in particular, the medical field is not necessarily rooted in health at every size. So being able to have that experience and education for yourself can also be so powerful in moving forward and taking care of your body and doing what you need to do to feel more connected to your body as it is right now.
I love the HAES approach or health at every size. And I think that speaking to that is, of course, so important. I also think it's so important to have that clinical team and that team to surround yourself with and support you, because like you said, neurons that fire together wire together. If we're trying to learn this new language, if we're trying to unlearn these old habits, the more exposure that we have to these types of conversations, the more consistent we are. And I think that can help us unlearn some of that when we're not only working with a therapist, but we're also working with a dietitian. I think we have two new avenues of support that can help us unlearn and relearn and do a lot of that work. Plus, like you said, I love when a client has a dietitian, because they can speak to that world and that lane. They're trained in it. They're the professionals. And then it frees up a lot of our therapy space to be able to get into those higher level or deeper or other things too. So I think it's a great way to approach a client's goals or the things that they want to work on from multiple different angles. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah. Yes. It's a huge help when people can do that. And when clients are willing to, of course, again, going back to getting the buy-in is a huge piece of that. But when we can have a team of clinicians working together, it can be really powerful. And something that you said also really reminded me of the importance. This is something that I often do in the beginning of my work with clients, is to really take inventory of your beliefs about food, and your body too, but a lot of it is like the beliefs about food, and being able to kind of pull those apart a little bit more, because sometimes we don't realize how many beliefs we have that are rooted in diet culture and just, even our own bias about food that are impacting the choices that we make, and really being able to bring those into therapy, or even just, if you're doing your own self-exploration, being able to write them down and look at them. Okay, like, where did this belief come from? Where did I learn this? Because not all of the beliefs that we have are facts. Our brain often thinks they are, but it's not necessarily true. So being able to look at these beliefs and say, okay, let me try to really pull that apart and better understand where it's coming from, but also try to reframe some of that, because it could be really negatively impacting all of the choices that you make.
I don't think there is anything more challenging than the deconditioning process that we have to go to. And it's such a process of like excavation and self reflection and choice. There's so much that goes into it. As you were saying, Alex, like sometimes we don't realize like all of the beliefs that we have around one single thing. And so it really is such a mental process. It's like a whole like full-time job in itself for us to go through, sort through, to decide what doesn't stick with us, to pick different beliefs. So thank you for that tip, that tool, and for also speaking to the power of working with a team or finding a support team, creating a team for yourself. It's exactly what Heather and I do in this podcast, of aiming to bridge the gap between the mind, body, soul, between the different worlds, like the more holistic world and the more clinical world.
I like to what you guys obviously are doing with the mind and body and connection, and being able to recognize that there's not just one way to go about solving a problem or treating yourself or towards bettering yourself, and being able to say, okay, what is it that works best for me, and how can I find an avenue that I feel connected to, that I can really buy into and pull in. Because yes, I obviously am a huge advocate of therapy, given that I'm a therapist myself, but I also acknowledge that therapy isn't necessarily for everyone. Yet I do think it's so important to get help and to find what works for you when it comes to managing your own mental health and really working on yourself.
No, I agree completely. And I think it's like, start somewhere. And whether that's starting with a dietitian, whether that's starting with the energy work and a spiritual teacher like Devon, whether that's therapy, like go somewhere, start somewhere. Because I do think, and I often say this, but I realize that this is like a privileged thing to say. Like I want everyone to have access to be able to this healing and doing this work. And I wish it was a basic human right. I understand that it isn't and it can't be. However, it's important. So we, all three of us, know to start by meeting our client where they are. And I think what we all speak to is helping our clients meet themselves where they are too, and how important that is. I think that this was, as I expected, a wonderful conversation. And I'm so grateful to you, Alex, for joining us and sharing all of this information. I will include all of your information, your Instagram, the website to the therapy group, all in our show notes. So if anybody is interested in connecting with you or following you further, they certainly can do so. Devon, thank you for being here and sharing this space with us as well, and allowing me to bring Alex in as our first guest of 2024. We have many more guests to come, as we like to do. At the end of each month, the final episode, we will be bringing in a guest speaker. So stay tuned for more of that. And thank you, Alex. Thank you, Devon.
Thank you, guys. So glad we could do this. This was great.
Yeah. And we'll tune in. We'll see everybody next week. We are so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.